find different colors to these characters. And
The cameras had long stopped rolling. The laughter faded into silence. But in one quiet corner of his New York apartment, Ben Stiller stood still, staring at an old black and white photo of two people who meant the world to him. His mother, Meara, and his father, Jerry Stiller. Not just legends of American comedy, but the very foundation of his being. They were once the heartbeat of America's laughter, a comedic duo that redefined television and stage. But time, as it always does, moved on. First, his mother slipped away quietly. Then, 5 years later, his father passed, in the midst of a world already grieving. No fanfare, no final applause, just loss and the weight of memory. Behind every joke, every punchline Ben ever delivered lived the echoes of their voices. This isn't just a story about fame. This is about what remains when the lights go out and all that's left are the people who raised you. Now, we turn back the clock to where it all began.
Benjamin Edward Meara Stiller was born on November 30th, 1965, in the heart of New York City, but more accurately, he was born into the spotlight. His first crib may as well have been a backstage couch. With two of the most recognizable comedy talents in America as parents, Ben's childhood was shaped not just by lullabies and bedtime stories, but by the rhythm of punchlines, the pacing of sketches, and the nervous tension before a curtain call. His father, Jerry Stiller, was a loud, quick-witted performer known for his iconic roles in Seinfeld and The King of Queens. His mother, Meara, brought both vulnerability and fire to her performances. Together, they formed Stiller and Meara, a comedy duo whose faces became regular fixtures on American television throughout the 1960s and 70s. Their dynamic chemistry on screen mirrored their real-life marriage, complex, passionate, resilient. Growing up, Ben wasn't just a bystander to entertainment. He absorbed it. At just 9 years old, he made his acting debut on his mother's show. By his early 20s, he was already writing, directing, and performing in short comedy sketches, many of which aired on Saturday Night Live or MTV. His sensibilities combined the absurd with the satirical, always towing the line between sharp intellect and physical comedy. Ben's career took off in the late 1990s and early 2000s, with breakout hits like There's Something About Mary and Zoolander. He became synonymous with characters who were awkward, overconfident, deeply flawed, and yet somehow lovable. Behind those characters, there was always a hint of self-awareness, a nod to his upbringing in an industry that never stopped performing. Yet, despite his fame, Ben often admitted to feeling like an outsider in Hollywood. He once said, "Growing up around show business made me respected, but also made me fear it. The highs were euphoric, but the lows, the silent dressing rooms, the fading calls, left lasting impressions." Fame, for Ben, was never about the red carpets or flashing bulbs. It was a continuation of a family legacy, one built on timing, grit, and emotional truth. But that legacy came with shadows. With two towering figures as parents, there was always the question, could he live up to them? Could he ever truly step out of their spotlight? Or was he destined to walk in their echo? As he grew into his own identity, as actor, director, father, Ben carried those questions quietly, until life, as it often does, brought answers not through applause, but through loss. Before Ben Stiller ever made an audience laugh, his parents were already masters of the craft. Jerry Stiller was born in Brooklyn in 1927 to a working-class Jewish family. His father drove a bus. His mother kept the home together. The backdrop was humble, but Jerry's dreams were loud. He served in World War II and later studied drama on the GI Bill. His voice was commanding, his presence intense, but it was comedy that truly unlocked him. It was how he fought back against a difficult world. Meara, born in 1929, was the daughter of Irish Catholic immigrants. Her early life was marked by silence, especially after her mother's sudden death when Anne was just 11. That loss left a hole in her heart that never fully healed. She found solace in theater, using performance as a way to express emotions that words couldn't capture. Their paths crossed in the early 1950s at a New York talent agency. Jerry was captivated by Anne's fierce intelligence and unconventional beauty. She wasn't looking to be part of a comedy act, but she was looking for connection. Their chemistry was immediate, electric. Within a year, they were married. Together, they created Stiller and Meara, not just a comedy duo, but a cultural phenomenon. They performed regularly on The Ed Sullivan Show, bringing to life a sharp, clever, often chaotic interplay between a neurotic Jewish man and his fiery Irish wife. Audiences loved them. They were real, they were raw, and they were funny in a way that made people feel seen. But behind the laughter, their life wasn't always scripted. Anne once admitted that while she loved Jerry deeply, she often felt like she lost herself in their act. She said in an interview, "I didn't set out to be a comedian, but I loved him, and he needed a partner, so I became one." Their home was filled with laughter, yes, but also tension. Like many creative couples, their passion sometimes turned into sharp words, long silences, and quiet resentments. Ben, as a child, felt the weight of those moods. While other kids saw their parents after 5 p.m., Ben watched his parents rehearse punchlines or argue over bookings. Still, he adored them. He'd sit backstage during club shows, wide-eyed, watching his parents transform into stars. On weekends, they'd let him stay up late to see themselves on TV. But when the cameras went off, he noticed how tired they were. He once described his mother as the funniest person in the room and the saddest when no one was watching. Jerry was stricter, a man of structure and rules. Anne was more emotional, prone to quiet reflection. Ben inherited both, his father's relentless work ethic and his mother's deep well of feeling. The mix would shape his entire creative life. As the years passed, the world changed. Comedy styles evolved. Their bookings slowed. Anne began acting more in dramas. Jerry found renewed fame in sitcoms. But their bond remained even when fame faded. They took long walks, argued over crossword puzzles, shared memories that only decades together could build. To the outside world, they were a power couple. But to Ben, they were simply mom and dad, deeply human, flawed, and profoundly loving. In many ways, Ben's career was built not in rebellion, but in reverence. He didn't try to escape their legacy. He expanded it. But with every step forward, he also carried the growing fear of what life would look like when they were no longer around. And then, slowly, that fear became reality.
The beginning of the end for the Stiller family didn't arrive suddenly. It arrived quietly, the way time often takes the people we love. Slowly at first, then all at once. For Meara, the decline was gentle but unmistakable. In interviews from the early 2010s, Ben hinted that his mother's health had been fragile for years. She was aging, slowing down, no longer the fiery performer who once battled nerves backstage before stepping into the spotlight. Her memory grew softer, her steps lighter. Some evenings, she simply sat near the window, watching the New York skyline as if revisiting a life lived in fast motion.
When she passed away on May 23, 2015, the family did not release specific medical details. Ben simply said she died after a brief illness, a phrase that often hides the painful truth of long-term decline. What mattered more than the cause was the absence she left behind. Ben later described the moment he received the call, that weighted silence on the other end of the line, the kind that feels like an entire lifetime collapsing in a single breath. He remembered rushing home, remembering her voice, remembering the way she used to tell him, "Comedy is honesty, Benny, even when it hurts." And now honesty hurt more than he ever imagined. 5 years later, grief returned, heavier, sharper, and far more isolating. Jerry Stiller was 92 by the time his body began to fail. Age had thinned his voice, softened his movements, yet his spirit remained loud, the same booming presence that had made Frank Costanza one of television's most unforgettable characters. During the final years of his life, he stayed mostly at home. Ben visited often, sometimes just sitting beside him, saying little. Their silences were comfortable, woven with decades of unspoken love. In May 2020, the world was deep in the early shock of the COVID-19 pandemic. Hospitals were overwhelmed. People were mourning quietly, privately. In the middle of that global grief, Jerry Stiller took his final breath. Natural causes, Ben wrote. Peaceful, at home. But the timing was cruel. The pandemic meant no large mourning, no final gathering of friends, no public goodbye for a man who had given America some of its most iconic comedic moments. Ben later said the hardest part was having to process his father's death while the entire world was already grieving. Loss felt heavier when no one could hold each other. He remembered the last time they spoke, a brief conversation, simple but warm. Jerry thanked him for checking in. Ben promised he'd come again soon. He didn't know soon would never come. Both parents slipped away differently, one through quiet decline, the other through the stillness of age, but their departures carved the same wound. Losing his mother took one half of his foundation. Losing his father erased the other. And suddenly, the man who grew up surrounded by laughter found himself standing in a home that had gone completely silent.
There are goodbyes whispered under flashing lights, and there are goodbyes spoken in silence. For Ben Stiller, both of his final farewells to his parents belonged to the latter. When Meara passed away in 2015, the family made a decision that caught many by surprise. There would be no public funeral. No red carpets, no celebrity speeches, no televised tribute. It was, as Ben later explained, what she would have wanted. A woman who had once made millions laugh chose to exit quietly. The ceremony was held in a small private chapel on the Upper West Side. It was raining that morning, not heavily, but enough to blur the outlines of the city they all called home. Close family members attended, a few cousins, longtime friends from the theater scene, and of course, Jerry and Ben. Ben wore the same dark suit he had worn years earlier for a film premiere, a silent nod, perhaps, to the blurred lines between his two worlds. But this was no performance. As the rabbi spoke softly about Anne's early life, her deep love for Jerry, and her fierce devotion to her children, Ben sat motionless, clutching a folded piece of paper in his hands. That paper held a letter he'd written to his mother just hours after her death. He didn't read it aloud at the service. He simply walked to the front and placed it inside the urn beside her photo and whispered, "You were the truth behind every laugh." There were no standing ovations, just silence, the kind only grief can carve. When Jerry Stiller passed 5 years later, the world was in chaos.
The COVID-19 pandemic had turned even the most sacred rituals into logistical nightmares. Hospitals were overrun, gatherings were restricted, death had become a lonely affair. Ben wanted more for his father, a celebration, a crowd, applause, but fate had other plans. The funeral took place in May 2020, with only 5 people in attendance. Ben, his sister Amy, 2 family friends, and the officiant. Everyone wore masks. Chairs were spaced apart. The New York air, usually buzzing with spring energy, felt frozen in place. The ceremony was held at a small cemetery in Queens, not far from where Jerry had grown up. There were no cameras, no press, but Ben brought something with him. An old black-and-white photo of Jerry and Ann from their first television appearance together. In it, they were young, unguarded, filled with a kind of joy that never made it into scripts. He placed the photo gently on top of the casket. "I hope you're with her now," he said quietly. There was no eulogy, no procession, just a long silence as the earth closed over a man who had made millions erupt in laughter, and who, to his son, had simply been Dad. Later that evening, Ben walked home alone through empty streets, past shuttered theaters and darkened comedy clubs. And somewhere in that quiet city night, he realized something. He was now the keeper of their legacy. The last Stiller on stage.
The deaths of Meara and Jerry Stiller didn't just leave emotional scars. They rewrote Ben Stiller's entire inner world. When his mother passed in 2015, Ben was still one of Hollywood's most bankable comedic actors. But behind the scenes, he was already shifting. He took fewer acting roles. He stopped chasing the spotlight that had once seemed inevitable. In interviews, he spoke less about career and more about family, legacy, and time. "Losing her," he once said, "made everything feel smaller, even success." He didn't fall apart. He simply withdrew, quietly, deliberately. The loss humbled him, slowed him, softened him. Then came the second blow. When Jerry died in 2020, it struck differently. The world was already on pause, and suddenly, so was he. There were no film sets to run to, no press tours to distract him. He had to sit with the grief. That, he later admitted, was the hardest part. There was no escape, just silence. But from that silence came something new. In 2022, Ben made a powerful return, not with slapstick, not with satire, but with Severance, a cerebral, haunting television series he directed and produced. The show explored identity, memory, emotional separation, themes that mirrored his own journey of loss. Critics hailed it as the most mature, emotionally resonant work of his career. It wasn't a reinvention, it was a reckoning. Ben never tried to replace what he lost. Instead, he honored it. He has since become a quiet guardian of his parents' legacies, sharing photos, memories, and tributes on rare occasions. But more than anything, he carries them in his work, in every pause, in every carefully chosen frame, in every character searching for meaning behind a smile. He once said, "My parents weren't just funny, they were brave. They told the truth, even when it hurt. I think I'm finally learning how to do that." And perhaps that's the real inheritance. Not the fame, not the fortune, but the courage to be real, even when the laughter stops. In the world of comedy, timing is everything. But in life, timing is rarely kind. Ben Stiller grew up under the brightest of lights, guided by two parents who taught him that laughter could heal, distract, and even protect. But nothing, not fame, not fortune, not all the punchlines in the world, could prepare him for life without them. Still, he presses on, not as the wild-eyed comedian of Zoolander, nor as the clumsy security guard in Night at the Museum, but as a man quietly navigating grief, purpose, and the weight of memory. His latest works are quieter, deeper, more reflective, the product of someone who has seen the cost of a spotlight up close. In every frame he directs now, there's a shadow of Anne, of Jerry, of a childhood that was never ordinary. Perhaps that's the final joke life plays. Behind the biggest laughs often lies the deepest sorrow. And maybe, just maybe, we keep laughing, not to forget, but to remember. Do you still remember Jerry Stiller and Meara? And how they made you laugh, even when they were quietly carrying so much?